President Trump speaking exclusively with FBN and dropping this bombshell on health care.
Health care is going to happen at some point. Now, if it doesn't happen fast enough, I'll start the taxes. But the tax reform and the tax cuts are better if I can do health care first.
What about infrastructure? How do you see it? When do you see it?
Very soon. I see it as part, perhaps, of the health care plan.
Now, the White House may be having trouble getting conservative Republicans on board with health care, but the president's signaling to FBN that he could combine health care and infrastructure to perhaps get Democrats on board. But will Democrats sign on to that? To the Wall Street Journal's Shelby Holliday, Democratic strategist Tom Baer, and former Trump New York campaign co-chair Joe Borelli. Shelby, let me start with you. The idea is everyone, loves infrastructure. Perhaps you bring over some Dems on that, give them some things they want, and get them to sign on to maybe the Ryan health care plan and make up those votes lost to the Freedom Caucus.
It's an interesting idea, and Trump's right. Infrastructure is supported by Democrats, but to combine infrastructure and health care is wishful thinking at this point. It is not something Democrats are willing to sacrifice on the health care front.
What would they be sacrificing?
In order to get, well, they don't want to repeal and replace Obamacare. They want to strengthen Obamacare in different ways, but they do not agree with Paul Ryan or any of the Republicans when they say tear up Obamacare, remove subsidies, change the structure of how health care is sold. So I don't see them negotiating on this point. I don't think that brings them over. But health care, only 4% of Americans, according to a Wall Street Journal poll, say health care is working. So it's a priority to change it.
But a higher percentage have now said that they would only like to see tweaks with Obamacare, not full repeal.
It's true. So it's a really tricky subject because everyone wants to change it. They just can't agree on how.
All right, so Joe, the Democrats are intransigent. What about the What about the Freedom Caucus? Were of the 32 members of the Freedom Caucus, 29 outdid President Trump during the election. People in their districts love them. They sent them to Washington, D.C. specifically with their own mandates, including full repeal of Obamacare. But I'm hearing from some scuttlebutt that maybe they're willing to negotiate. Is that true?
Well, right. You had Mark Meadows on some radio and television interviews over the past couple of days saying that we are closer than people think on a health care bill that the Freedom Caucus would support. I think we need to be clear. There is no scenario where the GOP could have any excuse for not repealing and in many cases replace Obamacare. This is the sole driver. This is the sole issue which put nearly every member of the House Republican caucus in Congress. Failure is not an option on this issue.
Could this be the compromise, allowing states to decide whether or not to go with pre-existing conditions?
Yeah, I mean that's sort of some of the things that Paul Ryan had been speaking about, and that's some of the debate you're seeing in the states at the state level for adjusting to any proposed change.
Politically tricky, though.
Politically, all of it's tricky. That's why we're talking about it. Tom, the Democrats have now become the party of no. Is there anything that they're willing to negotiate to help move along the economic needle?
Absolutely. I think what you're seeing in this interview, which I conjoin in my mind with the Bannon interview that he gave to Mike Goodwin, what you're seeing here is the need for the president in what I would call the second 100 days to have a legislative accomplishment. And as we know from the primaries and as we know from his history, President Trump is not really a Republican. And taking a leaf out of the book of President Clinton and President Reagan, there's every reason to suppose that he's going to reach out to the Democrats. And the phrase I think of, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down.
Those guys had counterparts, though, from the opposite party who did come to deal, all right? They did come to get things done. It wasn't always about obstructionism. So if that is the case, and you're right, President Trump has already said he's going to be nimble. He wants to get things done. He wants to have accomplishments.
Absolutely.
But can he find anything that the Democrats are willing to negotiate on?
Absolutely.
What?
Well, first of all, there is no reason to suppose, even though the councilman would disagree with me, there's no reason to suppose that there has to be a full repeal and replacement in a deal that would be made. And if you take moderate Republicans and center Democrats and lop off the ends, there is no reason why there cannot be legislative accomplishment. The Democrats are not going to be the party of no if they're asked. And remember, in this entire health care legislation matter, nobody ever came to them. Nobody ever spoke to them. They brought it up, and that's it.
Well, Ryan made a big mistake by not really speaking to anyone, whether it was the Freedom Caucus, Democrats, and Tuesday group. He thought he had it all figured out.
I don't know what you think, but Ryan, it seems to me, even though he's very bristly and executive, is showing what the Wisconsin version of flop sweat. This guy is not getting it done. And the president knows that. And so there's going to have to be change. That's what you saw.
So what do you see in that change, John?
Well, there are two paths that Paul Ryan can take. You can either do something using budget reconciliation, which means you can get it done with just Republicans. That's what they were hoping health care would do.
Not infrastructure.
Or you can go, and with taxes, though, or you can go the route you were mentioning where you get some support from Republicans and Democrats.
Yes.
It's very tricky to do both, and I think at this point, Trump has shown a willingness to reach out to Democrats. He's floating the idea now of saying tax cuts for the middle class. We don't necessarily have to cut taxes for everyone.
Right, yeah.
He is starting to hedge that way.
We did hear Spicer even say that, too, when Blake was asking about next year when people were filling out their tax form. He says, I hope we have middle-class tax cuts. Nothing for rich people. That's something that Democrats rejoice with. But, Joe, how does this work? Because the clock is ticking and the anxiety is building.
Right, and that's why I think, trying to sweeten the pot for Democrats might be a fool's errand at this point. I don't think no matter what the president offers, even after he has offered some sweeteners for them, you're going to see any compromise. The people like Joe Manchin are the exceptions of the Democratic Party. They're not the norm. The party is entrenching itself as an opposition party who will do anything to sort of dissuade the public from supporting the Trump agenda.